Hi folks, my name is Ms. Midhat, and today we're going to focus on the following question. How can mathematical modeling be used to represent distance and speed? So the goal of today's video is to start to understand this concept of mathematical modeling by defining it and then beginning to engage in this actual process by looking at a modeling prompt. So what is mathematical modeling? Well, it's a process. It's a process that uses mathematics to represent, analyze, make predictions, or otherwise provide insight into a real world phenomena. I mean, you might be reading this and you might be thinking, oh, this sounds just like a word problem. Actually, very different from a word problem, right? Some parts are similar in the sense that modeling prompts, they're also often expressed in words, but they definitely involve a lot more thought than a more straightforward word problem. Okay, because modeling prompts, they really challenge you as the modeler to start to sort of think creatively within the constraints that you're given, right? So there's this whole concept of deciding what information is important, asking for more information if needed, making reasonable assumptions, and considering the implications of the model itself. So you'll notice that there is this diagram right here. And this is really what the process looks like. And I'm going to go through this in a moment. But you may notice that the process, just by looking at this diagram, the process is pretty cyclical, right? You're going to start with this first item right here, identifying and specifying the problem to be solved. But you'll notice that the order in which things happen after that, it continues, but then you go back to actually identifying and specifying the problem to be solved later. So what is this really saying? Well, it's saying that modeling, it's a cycle, right? You evaluate your model, you refine it. So it's not like, when you're completing a mathematical modeling prompt, it's not like, you end up with a correct answer right away, right? You come up with some sort of answer, but the models can be rough, which means that you can go ahead and refine them. So they're rough, but they're still very useful. And they can definitely be refined to represent real world relationships more accurately. So I'm going to sort of summarize what this diagram is saying. And you'll notice again, the first thing that's happening here is essentially you are making sense of the situation and identifying the problem. We're going to be looking at a situation in a moment and sort of working through these three items right here. Deciding what to model in the situation, deciding what assumptions you will make, and then gathering and organizing important information. So something else to consider, this is really the space where you look to understand the question, right? You think about what the question means before starting to make a strategy to answer it. So are there words you want to look up? Does the scenario make sense? Is there anything you want to get clearer on before you start, right? So that's really what's happening here, making sense of the situation and identifying the problem. After that, formulating a problem is your next task, right? So once you've made sense of the situation and identified the problem, you're going to create geometric or graphical, tabular, algebraic, or statistical representations that describe relationships between variables, right? You're doing the math, if you will. Okay, what's next? Well, next, you use your model to reach conclusions. So you're analyzing these relationships and performing computations to draw conclusions. Okay, and you're still not done because notice what happens next. Report. Share and explain your model, your conclusions and the reasonings behind them, but then you're going to reflect and refine, right? So you interpret the data, you interpret and validate your conclusions and model by comparing them with the situation. So the refine part is here now. You're improving your model, right? This is where that cycle comes in. You're improving your model and you explain how you improved your model or how your model can be improved. Okay, so this really is the process when it comes to mathematical modeling. So we're going to be looking at a prompt right now, and we're really going to focus on this first area right here, making sense of the situation and identifying the problem. That's what we're going to focus on in this video. In another video after this one, you'll sort of see what an actual prompt or a response will look like for everything else. Okay, so here's the situation. Two friends, Han and Jada, live 7 miles apart. One Saturday, they decide to meet up somewhere between their houses. They each leave their house at 8 a.m. and travel toward each other. They want to choose a place to meet so that they both arrive at the same time. Where could they meet? All right, so just a reminder of that diagram. We have it right here. And really what you want to do, okay, the first thing that you want to do here is really think about What do I understand about this task? Now, what I'm going to say, folks, is this. Mathematical modeling, it can be very complex sometimes. And I definitely encourage you, for every question that I post on here, to pause the video for as long as you need, right? If you need to reread the prompt, if you need to rewind and listen to sort of like the explanation about what mathematical modeling is, I encourage you to do this, especially if you haven't done something like this before. This will take time to sort of understand more and more. So again, what do I understand about this prompt? And also, what would I need to know in order to answer this question myself? Right? So what do I need to know to answer this question? What questions do I have about this prompt? And essentially, if I were going to respond to this prompt, what would you try? Right? You don't need to complete a strategy for answering the prompt, but really you want to understand what the prompt is asking. So think about the question, like when you're thinking about the question before you start, you're really sort of thinking about, well, what is this question asking, right? Are there words you want to look up? Does the scenario make sense? Is there anything you want to get clearer on before you start? Okay, next, what are some things to consider when walking to meet a friend at a particular time? Okay, and then what might you need to know to plan your model? Write some assumptions you might want to make here. So again, we're really focusing on these two items over here. And I encourage you. I'm not going to be giving you any answers here for, what the answers to these should be, because these are really up to you. So I encourage you to pause the video for as long as you want and really think through these questions in order to help you get the information that you need to help you create a model later on. Okay, once you've done this, once you've kind of thought through these 4 questions, the next thing that you want to do is to gather and organize important information, right? So research additional information you might need. And really, like, how do you figure out information you might need? Well, think about the unknowns, right? Identify the unknowns. So what are the meaningful quantities in this situation? What information would be useful to know? And it might help, this might help if you use a table that looks like this, right? So you can jot things down that you already know given the prompt. Okay, there's a couple of things that sort of like jump out at me right now that I already know, involving some numbers, some times, lots of stuff here. And then think about, well, what would be useful to know? Okay, what would be useful to know? Maybe that'll help me think about some additional information that I'm going to need to research, because that's what I would list here, right? Things I can think of, things I think I can figure out, research or assume. Now, in a future video, we are going to continue on with this process. We're going to start looking at the actual modeling aspect of it, the math, if you will. But for right now, really just sort of think through these ideas. And then once you feel like you have a good understanding of it, go ahead and check out the next video, which will continue with this process.